8 a.m., my father's funeral was just hours away, to be exact, when they showed up with S-led, GEHAMMERS, crack, in minutes. My handmade chicken coop, 3 months of grief therapy after losing my wife, was reduced to rubble. Cedar splinters mixed with the damp morning air as my terrified hens scattered. The smell of crushed marigolds from my wife's memorial garden filled the yard. And standing there, the HOA president. She even posted photos online with laughing emojis, calling it a lesson for people who don't belong. What she didn't realize was that right beneath my boots, buried 6 feet down, sat a 62-year-old drainage valve. A single rusty handle that controlled the water supply to their $5 million resort lake. The very lake that kept 347 property values sky high. The same lake that made their McMansions worth triple what they paid. One twist, 48 hours, and it would all be nothing but mud. Tell me, what would you do if your HOA destroyed your therapy project on the morning of your father's funeral? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. Because trust me, every HOA has pulled stunts like this. My name's Jasper Crawford Jazz, to the few people who matter. 8 months ago, I thought I knew how bad things could get. Third-generation electrician, recently widowed, taking care of a father who sometimes calls me Tommy because dementia doesn't care about timing. I inherited 2 acres in Willowbrook Estates from my grandmother back in 2001. Now, Willowbrook isn't your average neighborhood. It's the kind of place where people spend more on lawn care than most folks make in a month. Giant homes worth nearly $1 million, HOA dues that could fund a small town, and neighbors who measure grass with rulers. But my land, it sits at the lowest point of the whole subdivision. Every drop of rain, every sprinkler runoff, every storm, drain from all 347 homes funnels through my property into Willowbrook's prized jewel, the resort lake. After my wife Emily died of cancer, I built that chicken coop. Not because I'd gone country, but because grief makes you desperate for anything that feels alive. Hammering nails beat hammering whiskey. I handpicked each cedar board, built it on the same spot where my grandmother's chickens lived since 1961. The sound of Clara pecking corn in the morning. The smell of fresh pine, it kept me from falling apart. What I didn't know then was that under my land lay my grandmother's hidden gift, that drainage valve. I'd found a cryptic note in her old files. Emergency storm controls. Annual maintenance. I thought it was farm trivia. In reality, it controlled 73% of the water flowing into the lake. And then came Victoria Harlow. HOA president, late 40s, blonde, drives a white Range Rover with vanity plates reading Horine. She moved here 5 years ago, married to Preston, who conveniently runs the development company, already eyeing a resort expansion. Delilah's the kind who wears designer heels to check the mailbox and believes every problem can be solved by threatening someone's livelihood. Her violation notice landed on a Saturday, crisp, cold, and hateful. Unauthorized agricultural structure, $500 fine, additional $100 per day until removed. Called to explain about grief therapy, about losing my wife. You know what she said, Sir Crawford? Grief doesn't exempt you from community standards. Her words cut sharper than glass. Standing beside the coop that kept me sane while my father upstairs forgot my name, I felt something solidify inside me. I asked for a variance hearing. Denied. Requested mediation. Denied. Asked for a 30-day extension. Denied again. Here's the truth about Willowbrook Estates. It's built on illusions. That resort lake is the lifeline. To take it away and property values drop overnight. My modest ranch house among their monuments of debt was already a target, and targets don't last long. I watched Clara chase a grasshopper across the yard, smell of cedar mixing with lake water drifting through the morning air. That's when it hit me. They thought they were breaking me. They didn't know my land came with a kill switch. One rusty valve that could drain their empire into a worthless mud pit. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived another legal grenade. Thornfield and Associates Law, of course, because Delilah wasn't just HOA president, she ran her own law firm. Judge, jury, executioner, all in one polished package. The paper felt heavy in my hands. The kind of stock meant to intimidate. Notice of legal action. Immediate cessation required. 3 covenant violations. $2,000 in fees. 72-hour deadline. All this while my father lay in hospice calling for his dead mother. But Delilah slipped up. The violation photos. Taken from my neighbor's property. I knew the angle. The fence post gave it away. 20 years of electrical work taught me one thing. Documentation beats intimidation. That weekend, I drained $800 I didn't have to install for night vision cameras. My grandfather used to say, knowledge is expensive, but ignorance costs everything. Turns out he was right. While running the cables, I dug into HOA law. Hours of dry county codes led me to gold. Delilah never filed the proper amendments. Her so-called restrictions, legally worthless without county approval. Then came the jackpot buried in my grandmother's files. A 1961 property survey, musty, but priceless. My coop sat exactly where the original henhouse stood decades before the HOA even existed. Agricultural use grandfathered in, legal, untouchable. The smell of old paper mixed with sweet victory. And then the cameras gave me the proof I needed. 4:40 a.m. Monday. Motion alert buzzing my phone. Richard Harlow himself creeping through my yard with professional surveying equipment. Infrared footage caught him white as a ghost, taking measurements. Like he was planning construction, and that's when it all clicked. This wasn't about chickens. This was about land. The next morning I marched into the county planning office. Buried in stacks of dusty records was the smoking gun. Preliminary applications for Willowbrook. Resort Phase 2, submitted by Preston's company. And guess what? The expansion required an easement across my property, my so-called worthless. 2 acres were the key. Their entire plan depended on it. Couldn't afford to buy me out, so they tried to break me, drive me into foreclosure, grab the land for pennies, and expand their empire. Clever, ruthless. But this time, they picked the wrong man. That afternoon, Delilah called, her voice sharp and clipped, like a teacher scolding a child. Mr. Crawford, we've reviewed your county filing. Very clever. But the board has authorized immediate removal of your structure if you don't comply voluntarily. Meaning what exactly? I asked. Contractor standing by. Your deadline is tomorrow at noon. The line went dead with a click that echoed like a coffin lid. I sat there, the dial tone buzzing. In my ear, like electronic laughter. But beneath that sound, my mind was racing, connecting pieces I hadn't put together before. My property wasn't just at the neighborhood's low point. Geographically, it was the drainage control point for the entire community. Somewhere in my grandmother's old files. I'd seen references to emergency valves and manual drainage systems. That evening, stood on my porch, watching Clara chase grasshoppers as the sunset turned the lake into liquid gold. The air carried the scent of fresh cedar from my coop, mixing with that clean smell of lake water at dusk. Peaceful, almost like a painting. But I knew what lay beneath my boots, 6 feet down. An old piece of infrastructure my grandmother had. Managed for decades. And if Preston was desperate enough to trespass and falsify evidence to get my land, maybe that hidden valve was worth more than I ever imagined. Delilah's deadline came and went loud. It's embarrassing and ultimately meaningless. Noon on Friday found me sipping sweet tea on my porch, while 3 contractors in hard hats circled my chicken coop like confused tourists. Turns out, grandfathered agricultural rights bite harder than empty HOA threats. But victory breeds desperation. And desperate people make reckless choices. By Thursday evening, my phone lit up with notifications that felt like shards of glass in my stomach. An emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled for Sunday morning. The agenda, addressing health and safety hazards in Willowbrook Estates. Every homeowner got the notice, except me. I only found out when my neighbor Linda texted, asking if I was dying of some exotic chicken disease Sunday morning. While I was elbow deep in a restaurant's greasy electrical panel, Delilah staged her show trial. 30 neighbors packed into the clubhouse for a PowerPoint presentation that could have passed for propaganda. Chickens attract rats, she declared, clicking through slides of my hens as if they were evidence in a criminal case. Rats. Carry disease. Disease lowers property values. This agricultural operation poses a financial threat to our community. Her logic was flawless. If you ignored science, zoning law, and basic decency, but fear sells better than facts, especially when property values are at stake. The board voted 4-1 to authorize hazard removal within 48 hours. They even gave themselves the right to trespass onto my property in the name of community safety. I only knew because Linda's husband, David Carter, filmed the entire circus on his phone. Watching that footage, later seeing Delilah's practiced smile as she tore apart my character, something cold and calculating hardened in my chest. Two could play the public opinion game. I'd already started a Facebook group called Willowbrook Property Rights after her first threats. I filled it with historic photos of our neighborhood as farmland, Preston's midnight trespassing footage, and my own story of HOA harassment during family tragedy. Within a week, 87 neighbors had joined, sharing their own stories of Delilah's reign of control. Margaret Chen fined $3,000 for parking her disabled son's wheelchair van too many days in her own driveway. Bill Rodriguez cited for growing tomatoes in raised beds, smaller than flower gardens. The Parkers threatened with legal action for installing a wheelchair ramp without board approval. A pattern was forming. Delilah went after anyone who disrupted her carefully polished suburban fantasy-disabled access. Ethnic gardens, work vehicles, even my grief therapy chickens. All of it threatened the illusion that kept property values climbing. But Facebook was just the warm-up. The real move came with Heritage Day, a neighborhood potluck where I brought fresh eggs for my supposedly hazardous hens. 63 neighbors showed up, laughing, eating, sharing stories of the community's farming roots. Kids fed Clara by hand while the smell of corn and charcoal drifted through the air. For the first time since Emily's funeral, my property felt alive again, filled with hope instead of conflict. That's when Margaret Chen pulled me aside near Emily's unfinished garden. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "Jazz, I used to do real estate title research." I looked up Delilah's business filings. She glanced around as if planning a heist. Her firm represents the resort developers. She's been collecting pre-sale commissions on Phase 2. The puzzle pieces snapped together like a lock clicking open. Delilah wasn't protecting standards. She was clearing obstacles for a payout big enough to buy her own lake. But Margaret wasn't finished. She'd also uncovered original 1962 county drainage maps. They showed my land as the manual flood control point for the entire development. That night, armed with a flashlight and my grandfather's shovel, I started digging in my basement. 2 hours later, the shovel struck metal. Wrapped in oiled canvas, hidden like treasure, lay a valve. Wheel attached to a pipe thick as my arm. Cold, rough metal under my glove's butt when I turned it gently. It moved like silk. 20 minutes later, the retention pond behind my house had dropped 2 inches, staring at that wheel in the beam of my flashlight. Realization chilled me too. The bone. My chicken coop wasn't just sitting on random dirt. Stood directly above the drainage control system for 347 homes in one $5 million lake. Delilah wanted to play dirty. She had no idea I was sitting on the game board. Monday morning hit like a storm of paperwork. Certified letters, endless phone calls. Violation reports stacked higher than my workbench. Violation 1. Unsightly commercial vehicle disrupting residential aesthetics. My work truck. The same one that had repaired half the neighborhood's electrical problems, including Delilah's garage door last Christmas. Violation 2. Excessive noise disturbance. Translation: the 12-second backup alarm when I reversed out of my own driveway. Violation 3. Unauthorized frequent visitors creating parking congestion. The hospice nurses caring for my dying father. By Friday, I had 12 violations. Stacked like cruel trophies, total fines, $8,400 in climbing. Each notice crisp and calculated. It's designed to bleed me dry. But violation number 12 was the masterpiece. disturbing community peace through excessive emotional displays. In plain words, crying at my father's bedside was now an infraction. The smell of antiseptic filled his hospice room as I read the letter, my grief labeled a threat to property values. If there was ever proof that power corrupts, Delilah was it. But here's the truth. When you corner a man who's lost everything, he stops playing defense, starts searching for weapons. My Facebook group had exploded to over 200 members after Heritage Day. Every violation notice I posted sparked more outrage. The comments section turned into a support group for HOA survivors. Their stories worse than mine. And then Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7's On Your Side reached out. She'd been watching the storm we created online, and she smelled a story. Widowed electrician, a dying father, community pushed too far. And an HOA president about to face her reckoning. That was journalism gold. The TV crew arrived Wednesday afternoon. Cameras rolling as Rebecca interviewed me beside Clara's coupe. The late-day sun hit the cedar boards Emily had helped me choose, glowing warm against the backdrop of my therapeutic garden. 6 neighbors spoke on camera about their own run-ins with Delilah's petty rulemaking. But the real bombshell was Preston's midnight trespassing footage, crystal clear infrared video of a developer. Executive prowling private property with high-grade equipment, the kind of evidence that news directors dream about. The segment aired Friday at 6 p.m. Grieving widower, targeted by HOA during family crisis. Viewers saw my father's empty wheelchair. Violation notices piled on my kitchen table. Then a slow zoom on Delilah's lakefront mansion. It was pure storytelling, powerful, visual, and viral. Reddit lit up. Facebook groups shared it across 3 counties. Comment sections turned into a digital mob calling for accountability. But the true turning point came from an unlikely ally, Dr. Emily Chen Margaret's sister, an environmental scientist at the state. Right out after watching, she'd caught my offhand with David Carter about drainage control and wanted to understand my property's role in the system. People don't realize how suburban development rewires water flow. She explained over coffee that tasted like equal parts curiosity and possibility. Her maps looked like anatomy charts. Storm runoff traced like arteries from 347 rooftops, all funneling through hidden channels toward the resort lake. Someone with access to the original valve could control the water system for the entire development. My coffee suddenly tasted like leverage. That weekend, I tested it. Quarter-turn valve adjustments, documented with time-lapse photos, showed pond levels dropping inch by inch. A half-turn drained the decorative fountain at the clubhouse. By Sunday, I fully understood what I'd inherited. My grandmother hadn't just left me to acres. She had left me control of the community's lifeblood. Monday confirmed it. Resort management called an emergency board meeting. Weddings were being canceled. Bad reviews mentioned instability. Negative publicity was costing money, the kind that makes investors panic and working folks smile. Delilah's response was pure desperation. She hired a private investigator to track my every move, photographing visitors, cataloging weeds, building a file as if I were running a crime ring instead of mourning my father. But desperation breeds mistakes. Thursday night, my cameras caught 3 contractor trucks idling outside like vultures. My father died Saturday morning. The funeral was Friday at 10 a.m. Delilah's plan was cruelly simple. Demolish my coop while I buried him. She had no idea what lay 6 feet beneath my yard. Friday morning, 8 a.m., for hours before the funeral, I stood in my bathrobe watching 3 men with sledgehammers reduce my grief therapy project to rubble. My cameras recorded every illegal swing, every step of trespassing, every violation of rights. 12 minutes. 3 months of healing, gone. The scent of broken cedar mixed with Clara's terrified cries as she and the other hens scattered like refugees across my yard. But rock bottom has won. Vantage, it's a solid foundation for building something dangerous. While Delilah's crew left my property looking like a storm zone, I was in my basement digging through my grandmother's papers with the focus of a man who'd finally discovered his purpose. The 1962 correspondence with County Flood Control wasn't just paperwork, it was a weapon. Page after page of agreements between Grandma Crawford and county engineers established perpetual easement rights for maintaining manual flood controls. Dry language, yes, but explosive in its implications. The county had paid my grandmother $500 annually until 1987. The payment stopped when officials assumed the system was obsolete. But the legal rights transferred to her heirs me. My hands shook as I called the county engineering office. Rosa Martinez, the systems engineer, flipped through records. Her voice was steady, professional. "Mr. Crawford," she said, "your family has held flood control easement rights since 1962. That agreement supersedes all HOA covenants, municipal ordinances, or private restrictions." Translation: the HOA had no authority over me. Then Rosa added something that made my coffee taste like liquid revenge. That valve controls about 73% of water flow into the resort lake. A full closure would lower lake levels 8 to 12 feet within a week, depending on rainfall. I stared at the crater where my coop had been, realization burning through me. Delilah hadn't just taken my therapy project, she'd declared war on the one man who could turn her $5 million lakefront paradise into an empty bowl of mud. The maps Rosa sent me confirmed it. Storm drains from 347 homes, 3 retention ponds, 2 commercial centers, all tied to my valve-like veins to a heart. Close it, and the resort's crown jewel would become a mosquito swamp. The wedding dock would sit on cracked earth like a monument to arrogance. Property values would plummet 30 to 40% overnight. Delilah's expansion dreams, dead before they broke ground. And the best part, as legal custodian of flood control, I had every right to operate that valve. No permits, no HOA approval, no legal recourse for anyone affected. My grandmother hadn't just left me land. She had left me power, the kind that protects or destroys entire fortunes. That afternoon, while Delilah probably celebrated my coop's destruction with smug satisfaction, I stood over that buried valve knowing exactly what leverage really meant. She tried to break a grieving man. Instead, she had awakened someone with the power to bring her empire crashing down. By Saturday morning, my kitchen looked like a war room. Maps covered every surface. Legal documents stacked like ammunition. Coffee rings David Carter's strategy. Points across my grandmother's old table, where 4 very different people planned the downfall of a suburban tyrant. At the head sat Marcus Webb, a newly appointed attorney. A retired environmental lawyer, silver-haired and sharp as a blade. He'd moved to Willowbrook to escape HOA politics, but after hearing my story, he came out of retirement like a war horse smelling smoke, and he was ready to lead the charge. Life has a sense of humor like a drunk comedian. Rosa Martinez, the county engineer who confirmed my valve rights, sat across from me with watershed maps spread across the table. She studied them with the steady focus of someone who knew one truth better than anyone. Water always finds its way downhill, sometimes uphill if pushed hard enough. Rosa hadn't come because she owed me anything. She volunteered her Saturday. For one reason only: Victoria Harlow has been a thorn in my department's side for 5 years, she said flatly. Next to her sat Tommy Tank Harrison, a contractor built like a refrigerator with an attitude to match. Tank had his own score to settle with the HOA after they slapped him with a $2,000 fine for parking his work truck in his own driveway during a community event. He showed up with a box of homemade donuts that tasted like justice and the kind. A practical know-how only a man who actually builds things can bring. Then came our secret weapon, a loner Pratt. At 72, the retired county clerk arrived uninvited, hauling 3 boxes of public records and smiling like she'd been waiting her entire career for this moment. "Honey," she said, laying out documents across my counter, like tarot cards predicting Delilah's downfall. "I've been watching that woman abuse the system for years. It's about time someone reminded her that laws apply to everybody, even HOA presidents with delusions of adequacy." And at the head of the table sat Marcus, my attorney. He'd spent Sunday morning combing through my grandmother's easement papers with the precision of a forensic accountant dissecting mob ledgers. His conclusion was ironclad. My water rights weren't just valid, they were untouchable. "Jasper," He told me with the calm authority of a man who's won bigger battles. You don't just have the right to operate that valve, you have a legal duty to maintain it. If anything, the HOA has been interfering with your federal easement obligations. Rosa backed him up with professional engineering diagrams. Maps looked like the circulatory system of a mechanical heart. With my valve as the ventricle pumping life through Willowbrook's artificial ecosystem, she confirmed what I'd suspected. Full closure would break no environmental rules. The system was originally built with manual overrides for flood management. Shutting it was, in her words, just restoring the watershed to its pre-development. State Tank contributed muscle and organization. He rallied a dozen contractors and blue-collar neighbors through my Facebook group, setting up a rotating neighborhood watch to document every act of harassment or intimidation. HOA clowns think working people don't fight back, he said around a mouthful of glazed donut. Time to remind them what happens when you mess with someone who actually knows how to build things. But Eleanor, she brought dynamite. Her boxes contained property records on every board member. Conflicts of interest jumped off the pages, like neon signs. 2 board members owned stock in the very development company pushing expansion. The treasurer's wife worked at the law firm handling Phase 2 permits. The secretary's brother-in-law, the general contractor bidding on the resort deal. Eleanor tapped the papers with satisfaction. This isn't just shady. This is conspiracy. Hiding behind the mask of community governance, 6 hours later, fueled by enough coffee to float a battleship, our strategy took shape. Phase 1, present my easement rights formally, demand an end to harassment, and require restitution for damages. Give them 72 hours to act like civilized adults. Phase 2, if they ignored us. Demonstrate control with a minor valve adjustment, enough to drop lake levels visibly without permanent harm. Okay? Show of power. Phase 3. If they escalated, go public. Release maps, corruption records, and proof of valve control to the media. Let negative publicity squeeze them where it hurt most their wallets. Phase 4. If everything else failed, Marcus would cut through their covenants with environmental law like a chainsaw through plywood, and the unspoken emergency option sat quietly in the room, a full valve closure if they dared destroy more of my property by the end of Saturday. One truth had sunk, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Tank had the trades on his side. Rosa had allies in county government. Marcus knew environmental lawyers across 3 states. Eleanor had dirt on half the county commissioners. But the most important lesson was simpler. Knowledge is power. Especially when that knowledge means you can control the very thing keeping your enemy's property values from collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Sunday night. I stood over the buried valve in silence, knowing exactly what Monday would bring, and Monday delivered. Delilah had spent her weekend sharpening her favorite weapon, character assassination. Anonymous flyers appeared in every mailbox but mine. They showed my driver's license photo clearly obtained illegally. To text accusing me of being unstable after multiple family tragedies. The flyers warned neighbors to keep their children and pets away from me and report any suspicious activity. By Saturday, fake 1-star reviews flooded the internet about my electrical business. Claims I'd left homes unsafe, damaged property, and cursed out customers in cities I'd never even visited. One review accused me of being unprofessional during a job that supposedly happened while I was at my wife's funeral, but Delilah's masterpiece was more personal: phone calls. To my commercial clients, within 48 hours, 3 businesses canceled contracts after receiving anonymous tips about my so-called unstable behavior. She wasn't just smearing me, she was cutting off my livelihood while dressing herself up as the heroic community leader protecting families from a grieving man by Wednesday. The HOA board held a special safety discussion about residents in emotional crisis. My name was never spoken, but photos of my property, my truck, and even surveillance of me mowing my own yard were shown on their slides. Delilah had turned my grief into a public safety issue, and the smear campaign worked. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. Parents pulled their kids away when I walked by. It was as if she'd painted me radioactive. But here's the thing, when you back a man into a corner, especially a man who's already lost everything and discovered, he holds the nuclear option. You don't break him. You force him to make dangerous choices. Thursday night, I caught my war council back together. Marcus arrived with a briefcase full of righteous fury. Rosa carried updated engineering data that made my valve's destructive potential impossible to ignore. Tank showed up with surveillance photos that looked like they came from a federal task force. And Eleanor laid down a file thick enough to topple government's evidence of corruption that could scorch the HOA to ash. Marcus tapped his laptop, scrolling through fake reviews and canceled contracts. His voice was calm, but his eyes were steel. She's not just trying to ruin you, Jasper. She's trying to drive you insane enough to make a mistake. And that was the moment I realized Delilah wasn't just playing dirty. She was playing desperate. And desperate people always overplay their hand. It was the oldest play in the book. Isolation. Cut off your support network. Destroy your income. Push you until you break. So she can justify whatever comes next. That. Sunday morning, Rosa brought data that made my coffee taste like liquid revenge. County assessments showed the resort lake properties were valued at $47 million. A 12-foot drop in water levels would slash that valuation by nearly $18 million, triggering tax appeals that would strangle county resources for years. She's not just targeting you personally, Rosa explained, sliding spreadsheets across my counter like weapons. She's betting you'll be too civilized to use the power you hold. That's when Tank delivered the bombshell. His surveillance team had been tracking Delilah ever since the demolition. What they found made her smear campaign look like child's play, Jazz, Tank said, voice heavy. She's filing for a restraining order tomorrow. Claims you've made terrorist threats. Says you're plotting to poison the water supply and destroy property values. The accusations were pure fiction fabricated. Witness statements from board members suddenly remembering conversations. That never happened. But if granted, the restraining order would bar me from HOA meetings, restrict my movement in the neighborhood, finish whatever credibility I had left with clients. That's when Eleanor revealed the truth behind Delilah's desperation. Her research showed the Phase 2 development deal had strict performance deadlines. If Preston's company didn't secure my property by December 31st, they'd lose their $500,000 deposit and exclusive. Building rights worth millions? She's not just harassing you for sport, Eleanor said, adjusting her glasses like a judge about to deliver a sentence. She's staring down financial ruin. And desperate people do desperate things. The desperation, I realized, cuts both ways. Friday morning, I stood over my valve with a wrench in hand in 48 hours to decide if I was ready to fight fire with fire. Delilah had turned my grief into a weapon, my business into a target, and my life into a circus. Time to remind her what real power looked like. I turned the valve one full rotation counterclockwise and started the stopwatch. The lake level dropped instantly. In 24 hours, Delilah's $1 million view would become a nightmare. Game on. Saturday morning broke under a crystal-clear sky that felt like divine justice. By 8 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop. The first call came from Linda Henderson, a quiet but steady neighbor who'd endured Delilah's rule as long as I had. Her voice shook with disbelief. Jazz, you need to come see the lake. Oh my God, what did you do? By 7 a.m., I didn't need to ask. The resort lake had fallen 4 feet overnight. What had been a pristine shoreline for Instagram shoots now looked like the bottom of a drained aquarium. Exposed mud stank of rot and fish bones. The elegant dock used for $50,000 weddings now hovered uselessly over sludge. And then came the moment. I'll never forget. At 7:15 a.m., Delilah appeared in her designer running gear, ready for her usual lakeside jog. Instead, she was greeted by an ecological nightmare that could tank property values faster than a stock. David Carter at Crash. The sound she made a twisted mix of scream, sob, a damned primal. Howl echoed across the empty lake, like the death cry of an investment portfolio. My cameras caught every second as she froze in disbelief, staring at dock pilings rising from the mud like dinosaur bones. She stood there for 8 minutes, watching her perfect suburban empire drain away before her eyes. By mid-morning, my phone was a victory parade. Panicked homeowners, confused resort staff, wedding planners begging for solutions as their 6-figure events turned into mud wrestling tournaments. Each call was proof my grandmother's buried valves still had teeth, but Delilah struck back fast. By noon, she'd organized an emergency board meeting disguised as a community crisis response. Her plan? Blame me? The leaked agenda from my ally, Secretary Linda Ree, read like a courtroom indictment. Environmental terrorism, community safety, emergency property, seizure. She'd even invited the county sheriff pretending it was for public safety, but really to have me arrested the second I walked in. She called 3 TV stations too, ready to frame herself as the heroic leader protecting families from a so-called madman, but she underestimated us. Rosa had provided official county documents proving my authority over flood control. Marcus had drafted a legal brief so airtight even the evening news could understand it. Tank had rallied 50 supporters to pack the clubhouse, ensuring Delilah's kangaroo court would face an angry audience. And Eleanor? She prepared a scorched earth presentation. 5 years of HOA corruption, embezzlement, kickbacks that made Delilah's smear campaign look like amateur theater. By Sunday afternoon, the pressure was working. Resort management called the county in a panic. Wedding venues across 3 counties blacklisted Willowbrook. Photos of the drained lake went viral, tanking property tours and spooking buyers. The jewel of the neighborhood had become a foul-smelling crater visible from the highway. But Delilah wasn't done. On Monday, she filed a federal complaint claiming I'd illegally altered wetlands and destroyed wildlife habitats. Federal intervention criminal charges, massive fines, maybe even prison. If she couldn't break me with lies, she'd try to bury me with bureaucracy. That's when I pulled the trigger on my nuclear option. By Monday night, I was on the phone with every media outlet within 100 miles. By Saturday morning, Willowbrook Estates was swarming with cameras, reporters, news vans circling like vultures. The HOA's emergency meeting was scheduled for that night. Perfect Saturday. 7 p.m. the clubhouse overflowed. 137 residents crammed into a space built for half that. The air crackled like a title fight. Channel 7's van sat in the parking lot. Satellite dish pointed at the sky like a loaded weapon. And for the first time in years, I felt the scales finally tipping. It was like stepping into a stage play with Rebecca Martinez and her crew setting up cameras that would broadcast our neighborhood drama across 3 counties. The sheriff's department sent Deputy Williams, a reasonable man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than refereeing a suburban civil war. But the real show began when Delilah realized her carefully planned ambush had flipped into a very public trial with herself in the spotlight. She had organized this meeting expecting to paint me as some unstable villain who had sabotaged the community out of grief-driven madness. Her PowerPoint flashed dramatic photos of the drained lake, fabricated witness statements, and a timeline. Of my supposed descent into extremism, what she hadn't counted on was Marcus Webb, standing at the back with a briefcase full of legal evidence. Rosa Martinez in the front row with county engineering maps, and Tank Harrison surrounded by 50 blue-collar workers who looked ready for a good fight. "Ladies and gentlemen," Delilah began, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness teachers use before handing out detention slips. "We're here tonight to address the environmental terrorism that has destroyed our community's most valuable asset." But the murmur that rippled through the crowd wasn't the supportive chorus she expected. Too many people had seen the news coverage, read my posts, and begun connecting the dots. Mr. Crawford's illegal manipulation of our water system represents a danger to property values, community safety, and environmental protection, she continued, clicking through slides that might have been convincing if the audience hadn't already learned the truth. That's when I stood up and asked to speak. Deputy Williams gave a simple nod. He had already reviewed Marcus's paperwork and knew no laws had been broken. "Thank you," I said, walking to the front with calm confidence. "The kind that comes from holding all the cards. I want to address Mrs. Thornfield's claims about terrorism and illegal water use." I held up my grandmother's 1962 correspondence with county flood control, the yellowed papers glowing under the lights. These documents prove my family's legal authority to manage this infrastructure decades before this HOA even existed. The silence was so sharp you could hear the hum of the air conditioner. The county has confirmed my right and responsibility to operate these flood systems, I continued, nodding to Rosa, who rose to confirm the statement with official documentation. But the moment that cracked Delilah's facade came next. I pulled out my phone, dialed Rosa, and had the projector screen show her live stream as she walked to my valve. Everyone in the clubhouse could see her hands grip the handle. "This is what Mrs. Thornfield calls terrorism," I said. "Let's see what it actually looks like." Rosa gave the valve a quarter turn. Water began flowing back into the lake, visible through the clubhouse windows as the retention pond slowly rose. Gasps filled the room. It felt like a congregation watching a miracle. "The valve is restored to normal," I explained. "Lake levels will return in 6 hours. No damage, no sabotage, just lawful maintenance." Deputy Williams cleared his throat. "Ma'am, all documentation checks out. No laws have been broken." That's when Eleanor Pratt stood up with boxes of corruption evidence, and Linda re-announced her resignation from the board effective immediately. Chaos erupted. Homeowners shouting, demanding Delilah step down. 3 board members called for a vote of no confidence. Resort management sat frozen in the back, clearly calculating their legal exposure. Delilah tried to shout over the crowd, but her words were swallowed by hundreds of furious residents. She stormed out, spitting threats into the night as applause chased her to the parking lot like a wave of karma. 6 months later, I read about Victoria Harlow's sentencing in the county paper, while Clara III pecked at my bootlaces. 18 months in minimum security for embezzlement, fraud, and what the judge called conspiracy to commit institutional harassment. Preston's development company collapsed like a house of cards. The new HOA board, elected by the biggest turnout in neighborhood history, reversed every action against me within their second week. They reimbursed my legal costs, paid double damages for my destroyed coop, and sent me a formal apology now framed on my kitchen wall beside Emily's famous cornbread recipe. But the real beauty was what grew from the ashes. My 2 acres became the Willowbrook Heritage Garden, a living history project that smelled like herbs and possibility. Displays shared our farming past, complete with my grandmother's photos of feeding families during the Depression. The rebuilt chicken coop, crafted with volunteers, became a field trip destination where children learned that food comes from soil, not Super David Carteret's. The sound of their laughter mixed with clucking hens healed places in me no therapy ever had. Rosa now, far more than just my county contact, helped certify the property as an environmental education site. Together, we created the Easement Education Fund, a scholarship helping families fight back against HOA abuse. In just 1 year, we stopped for land seizures, saved a veteran's flagpole, protected a wheelchair-accessible van, and kept gardens growing where HOAs had tried to silence them. Every Memorial Day, our community hosts the Heritage Festival. Families gather, children collect eggs, and neighbors share stories of standing up to bullies in suits. Last year, we raised $47,000 to help families keep their land. But my favorite moments are still the quiet ones, standing on my porch at sunrise. Coffee in hand, cedar shavings underfoot, and watching hens scratch in the same soil my grandmother tended 60 years ago. The air smells like dew and wood, and for the first time in a long time, like peace. The sight of kids walking to school, waving at me and asking about today's egg count. The sound of water flowing steadily through systems that now protect instead of threaten. Emily would have loved this. She would have laughed at the idea of our grief therapy chickens becoming local education stars, and she would have been proud that we turned heartbreak into something that protects other families from the battles we once faced. The resort lake now sparkles like liquid gold again, but with a new kind of respect. People understand now that water, like power, belongs to whoever controls the source. I've been named the honorary environmental steward for our entire watershed. Doesn't come with a paycheck, but it carries enough weight to make any future HOA board think twice. Before harassing another homeowner, property values didn't just bounce back, they skyrocketed. Because, as it turns out, having a nationally recognized environmental education site beats having a neighborhood tyrant in charge every single time. Knowledge is power. But when knowledge is shared, it becomes community protection. So, if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments. You just might hear it in a future episode. And don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale of regular people standing up to suburban tyranny. Because every bully eventually learns that sometimes the quiet guy with the chickens is the one who controls the water. That's it for today's HOA madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, smash that like button, share your thoughts below, and make sure you're subscribed. More outrageous neighborhood showdowns are coming soon.